Pardon board is called back to order. Our next case is Mr. Randolph Matthieu. Mr. Matthieu, would you please give us your full name and DOC number?
My name is Randolph Joseph Matthieu. My DOC number is 117977.
Thank you. Mr. Matthieu, let me explain our process to you. First, we're going to conduct a pardon interview with you. And at the appropriate time, we'll allow those persons who wish to have input to speak. Presently here to speak on your behalf is Elizabeth Steverson, your cousin, Gerald Jackson, who is a Catholic minister. Michael Landcloss is present, but will not be speaking. At the end of that interview, you'll have an opportunity to speak, make a statement to the board, at which time after your statement, we'll vote. Do you understand our process?
Yes, sir.
This is the matter of Randolph Matthieu, DOC number 117977, date of birth, March 19th, 1952. He's classified as a second felony offender. He is currently serving a life sentence for the charge of second-degree murder, having been sentenced on June the 24th of 1987. Does that sound all accurate, Mr. Matthieu?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your case has been assigned to Ms. Bonnie Jackson. Ms. Jackson will begin our interview process. Would you please answer any questions she might have?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Matthieu. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
How are you doing right now?
I'm a little nervous.
That's understandable. So let me just start with some easy questions for you. How old are you, Mr. Matthieu?
71.
And how long have you been incarcerated in this case?
37 years.
I see that you're a second offender. What was your first conviction for?
My first conviction was in 1972, I believe. I had recently just gotten out of the Army. I was AWOL from the Army at the time, and it was for possession of LSD.
So you were convicted for possession of LSD?
Yes, ma'am. And I was given probation, and I went, I think, 10 years without having another offense.
Okay. So you were less than honorably discharged from the military because of this LSD charge?
No, ma'am. I had a general discharge under honorable conditions.
Okay. And then once you got out of the military, what did you do? What kind of work did you do? What was going on with you when you got out of the military?
Well, when I was released from the Army, I was worked in the construction field building houses.
How long did you do that?
I did that till the early 80s, and then I started working offshore in hydraulic workovers.
Did you have substance abuse issues during that period of time?
Yes, ma'am. I drank and did drugs during that time.
What was your drug of choice?
I smoked a lot of weed, marijuana.
What else?
I like to downers, Valiums, Tuinol, Seconal, Quaaludes.
And what about your drinking?
I drank, but I really didn't like to drink. Before I was released from the Army, I had never drank. I never drank beer or alcohol or hard liquor or anything. And then once I came back from Vietnam, I started drinking Wild Turkey 101 with water.
And how long was your tour of duty in Vietnam?
1 year. That was a standard tour in Vietnam.
Were you a drug addict and an alcoholic back then?
No, ma'am. I didn't start drinking until I got out of the service.
That's what I meant. From the time you got out of service till the time you got arrested on this charge, would you characterize yourself as a drug addict and an alcoholic?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk about this crime. On the night that this crime occurred, How did you end up at the Sailor?
Well, I was working, was working offshore 14 and 7 at that time, and that was one of my 7 days in. And I stayed pretty loaded when I came in from offshore. I had been drinking and I was popping pills. And sometimes I'd have blackouts to where I didn't, remember a whole lot about what took place the night before. And this is one of those instances where I was pretty loaded, and I ended up there, and I ended up picking up a cross dresser. And once I realized, what was going on, I took that person's life.
You're gonna have to help us fill in some of the gaps, okay?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
help us understand why that would have caused you to, this was a really vicious murder. He was shot 3 times. He was stabbed and his throat was slashed. Okay, so we need you to fill in a lot of details for us, okay? We're not gonna just gloss over things, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, how long had you been going to that bar?
I had never went to that bar before, to my knowledge.
That was the first time you've been there. And
Yes,
do you
ma'am.
remember how long you were there before you left with the victim?
I don't remember, ma'am.
Several hours, or give me some idea.
I'm sure I was there for an hour or two. I was walking unconscious, probably. I mean, I was loaded.
Do you remember how you struck up a conversation with the victim?
No, ma'am. I don't remember very much about that evening at all, ma'am.
Okay. You remember leaving the club or the bar with the victim?
No, ma'am.
Do you remember the victim being in your vehicle?
I vaguely remember a conversation and driving, and that's about it, ma'am.
Was there any sexual contact between you and the victim?
No, ma'am. I believe that when that started to take place is when I must have realized that it was not a woman, and I just lost it.
I mean, when you say when that started to take place, what had transpired?
I really don't recall, ma'am.
So you shoot a person 3 times, you stab them, and you slit their throat. And you can't remember anything that was going on around that situation?
No, ma'am. The only thing that I can think of is that I may have been having a flashback.
What did you do after the murder?
I imagine I went home, ma'am.
Well, when did you first become aware of the fact that you had murdered someone, Mr. Matthieu?
Several months later, when I was interviewed by some police officers.
And were you clear-headed at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
And when they interviewed you, what did you tell them?
Told them I had no knowledge.
Now, after you were arrested, you posted bond, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And on your next court date, you failed to appear. Remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
And you had fled to California, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So if you didn't have any knowledge or any recollection of what happened, why would you flee to California?
I was just scared to go to jail, ma'am.
And how long were you in California before you were returned to Louisiana?
Approximately 2 years. I had gotten an ex parte order from the trial judge allowing me to leave the state. And when I left, I just didn't come back.
Well, you know, you do have opposition from the DA, the sheriff, the Lafayette Police Department. The victim's family is opposed. So tell us what you have been doing over the last 36 years.
When I first got to the parish jail, I got my GED, and then I started working in the law library. And when I got to Angola, I participated in all the self-help programs. I started attending the JC's classes. And once I completed all those classes, then I started teaching those same classes to other offenders. I got involved with Vets Incarcerated, VBA Chapter 689. I was a member of the Lifers Association, which I was a member also of the Burial Committee with the Lifers Association at Point Lookout. I was a hospice volunteer for 16 years, caring for the dying and sitting with them when they took their last breath. I was a charter member of Toastmasters, Forgotten Voices, and I worked for the law library for 23 years. I also took a course from Northwest Missouri Community College and got an associate's degree in computer technology. I also took a 3-year course from the Diocese of Baton Rouge in ministry and theology, and was commissioned by Bishop Muntz as an extraordinary minister, the Catholic peer minister. And once I arrived here at the barracks, I took a course that was offered from BRCC in carpentry, and I completed that course.
Okay, stop talking. I know you've done a lot of things. You know, your carpentry training is a good thing, but what I'm primarily interested in are the kinds of programs that you've taken to help you understand why you committed this crime, to address your substance abuse issues, and to learn the impact of how your actions have affected other people. So let's talk about your substance abuse programming. I see you've done Celebrate Recovery, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you've done chemical dependency treatment. So tell me and the board what you got out of those programs related to your substance abuse issues.
Well, what I got out of all the programs that I've taken, including those.
No, sir. I want to talk about the substance abuse issues, because you're sitting here telling us this morning that you viciously killed an individual, and you claim to have no recollection of that whatsoever because of intoxication. So I am interested in knowing what you have learned about your substance abuse disorder, and how can that help you in the future if you're ever released. So I want to know specifically about the substance abuse programs, what you learned, what tools you acquired, and how you plan to use them.
I've learned that I can never drink or do drugs again, because if I do, it'll kill me. I have no control over them. They control me, and there's nothing that I can do. I can't take another drink of alcohol. I can't take another pill. I can't take none of that. And I don't want to. I've had the opportunity to take drugs in Angola. There's an abundance of it. And I took a chance, and I chose not to take any drugs. And I believe at my age, if I were to take another drug or take another drink, that it would literally kill me. And I've learned through the programs that I've taken that I needed a higher power to assist me with that, because I couldn't do it on my own. I can't do this on my own. Just like
Let me ask you this. Before you committed this crime, why do you think your drug and alcohol use was out of control?
I think it stemmed from my time in the service, man. At that time, I believe that it was my Vietnam service that had something to do with me doing the drugs and the alcohol. And I didn't realize that until I started associating with other Vietnam veterans and some of the problems that they were having. And I could relate to some of those problems. And when I came back from Vietnam, they didn't have all the programs they have now for veterans.
Well, tell us about the victim awareness program that you took.
I took the victim awareness program at Camp C, and also I taught that class. Every Sunday morning in the chapel, I taught that class. And I learned that there's a lot of victims, not just the, my family was a victim, my mother, my father, who are no longer with me, all my relatives that had to suffer from it, the victim's family, the victim's mother, the victim's brothers, the victim's father. I learned about all of that, man.
Well, tell me what you learned about that. Particularly as it relates to the victim and the victim's family. Tell me what you learned about that.
If I could go back and change what happened, I would. I can't change that. And I'm very sorry for what I did. I wish I hadn't chose to drink. I wish I hadn't chose to do drugs. I wish I had never went to that place. And I'm real sorry that it took place. And if I could talk to the victim, we're not allowed to contact the victims. We're not allowed to communicate with them. If I could, I would have apologized to them and told them how sorry I was years ago.
Well, I just want you to put yourself in their shoes for a moment. Okay, put yourself in their shoes for a moment. How do you think they felt when they found out just the horrific way their loved one lost their life? How do you think that has affected them over the course of these last 36 years?
I'm sure it devastated them, man. I'm sure I brought a lot of pain to that family. And I'm sure I caused a lot of pain and suffering. And I'm terribly sorry for it. I wish I could breathe life back into them, but
How did you become a hospice worker and why?
I became a hospice volunteer because I thought it was something that was worthwhile doing. Because as an inmate counsel, I was assigned to the treatment facility. And before Warden came, started the hospice program, offenders that were dying or they were sick enough to die were being placed in a room by themselves. They were taken off of the ward and put in a room by themselves to die. And I thought that was inhumane and it was terrible. And then when the hospice program started and you had 6 hospice volunteers who sat with this patient and that person didn't die alone, it just meant a lot to me. From the time I became incarcerated, I have done nothing but try to assist my fellow people I'm around. And this gave me the opportunity to do something that was not only Christian life, but it also gave me the opportunity to try to make their deaths a little more comfortable, to where they didn't die alone. They had someone there holding their hand, praying with them. And it made that transition a little bit easier for them.
Well, all the programs you've taken and all the things that you've been involved in, what has meant the most to you and has contributed to your growth?
I believe the 16 years I spent as a hospice volunteer had a real deep meaning to me, has changed me the most, I've had a lot more empathy towards the dying, and it has brought me so much closer to God, being with these people that were going to meet their maker.
You've got multiple letters of recommendation and support and commendation for your work over the last 36 years. But you also wrote a letter, and in that letter, one of the things that you said was that incarceration was the best thing that ever happened for you. Why did you say that?
Because if I'd have continued on the way that I was going, I feel like I'd have been dead a long time ago. And when I became incarcerated, I truly started to learn more about myself and more about life. I joined the Army at an early age. I was 17 when I joined the Army. And I was sent overseas to Germany. And when I turned 18, I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I wanted to go to Vietnam, and they sent me to Vietnam. And I feel that had I not been incarcerated at that point in my life, I would have been dead within the next year or two.
You have any family, Mr. Matthieu?
Yes, ma'am.
What family do you have?
I have a lot of cousins and relatives. I have a son and a daughter who I haven't talked to in several years. And my mother and father have both passed away. I have one aunt who is 95. She is the only sister still living from my mother's side of the family. And
why haven't you had a lot of contact with your children? What's been the barrier to that?
well, I did at one time. And several years ago, my mother passed away, and she made me the executor of her estate. And my daughter was real upset because she felt that, she should have been in charge of that. And my son got real close with me and ended up stealing right around $35,000 to $40,000 from me. And when he did that, he just quit taking my phone calls.
How did he steal $35,000 or $40,000 from you?
Had the bank write him a check for $35,000, man, out of my savings account. And then when my mom had left me a house, and when I put it up for sale, he went in and took all the furniture and started selling everything that she had online. And he just, once all of that started taking place, he chose not to have anything to do with it.
So, if you were successful, Mr. Matthieu, what would be your transition plan? Because, family support is crucial to success if you're released. So what do you have in place right now as a transition plan?
Well, right now, if I'm granted and I'm given parole, I'm probably going to go to the parole project And then my cousin Elizabeth Stevenson has a home in Tucker, Georgia, and her son lives across the street from her, and she has requested that I go live with her, and I think that it would be a good idea for me to go live with her. She's retired. She's like 3 years older than I am, and that would be my plan, would be to leave the state of Louisiana and go live with my cousin Elizabeth Stevenson in Georgia.
How would you support yourself?
Well, at 71, I have I've invested over the years. I've invested in all of the carpentry tools that I need. I'm a furniture builder. I build rockers, benches. I have a CNC machine that I do carvings with. I have a design program that I design different things for signs and plaques, and that's how I would make my living. At 71, I'm very limited of what I could do as far as for strenuous type of work, but I can build furniture, and I've done quite well over the years at the rodeos and everything else selling my furniture. And my cousin Elizabeth would help me, and her son would help me in any other means that I need. If I needed to find a job, I could find one at Walmart, being a greeter or working some type of job like that.
So tell us, from the state police barracks point of view, what can you tell us about Mr. Matthieu? He's been there for 4 years?
6.5.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, tell us about your experience with him at the barracks.
Well, when I got here, Matt was here, and he's had various jobs, usually because we needed him somewhere else. We don't have any problems out of him. He does whatever we ask him to do. I can tell you on his last assignment I had him doing, I kind of worked him a little too hard, so I kind of felt bad for him. But as far as his attitude, his work ethic, he's been a solid member of the foundation, and he does well with whatever we ask him to do.
Thank you. I see that you've only had 2 write-ups in the 36 years that you've been there. The last one was in 1990. Remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
It was a Rule 24. What was that about?
Unauthorized area.
And what was that about?
The lights are turned off at 10 o'clock, and after the lights were turned off, I walked over to a buddy of mine's bunk to get a cigarette. I was smoking at that time, and the officer wrote me up for unauthorized area because wasn't supposed to move around like that after the lights were out. And I have to say that was the last cigarette I smoked also, because I quit smoking after that.
And that was in 1990. So that was
Yes, ma'am.
30-something years ago. All right, Mr. Malbella, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson. Mr. Roche has.
Mr. Matthews, good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Matthews, it's very convenient for you to say that you don't remember anything about that night. So let me ask you a couple of questions. You told Mrs. Jackson that was the first time you ever went to that establishment. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever return?
Yes, sir, I did.
And when did you return?
A year or so later.
A year or so later, that's when they recognized you.
Yes, sir.
And they sort of held you until the police officers came to arrest you.
Yes. Well, they brought me in for questioning.
Yeah, okay, so why did you go back to the bar?
It was on my way home. I just stopped in for a drink.
Mr. Matthews, have you ever been married?
Sir,
Have you ever been married?
married?
Yes,
Yes, sir, 3 times.
3 times. And how many children do you have?
2.
2, okay. And I think you had your timeline a little bit off. When you got arrested and you got out on bond, how long before the police caught up with you?
Like about 2.5 years, 3 years, maybe something like that.
Yeah. It was not until 1986.
Yes, sir.
And
Yeah.
you were in California, am I correct?
Yes, sir. I was extradited back in March 13th of 1986.
So, and your reason for leaving the state of Louisiana, that you just didn't want to go to jail?
Yes, sir. I was terrified.
Thank you.
And I attribute that to the first time I had went to jail back in '72 when I had been arrested for the LSD.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Let's hear from those persons who wish to speak on your behalf, or Mr. Gerald Jackson. Jackson, if you would, please.
Appreciate y'all having me. I was the Catholic chaplain of Angola. Started in 1999, and for 16, 17 years, I was alone. Last 5 years up until 2002, I was a full-time chaplain. One of the programs that we had at Angola was we would invite church parishes to bring groups up to Angola, call them retreats. And basically, it was a busload of people from the church parish coming up to Angola. I would greet them there, and then we would have a tour of Angola, and then later on in the day, some of the guys would speak to them. Typically speaking, most of the groups that came up there were a little intimidated, you might say, when they first got to Angola. And so part of our program was that the first stop we would make with this group of kids or adults would be to stop off at the hospice chapel. And Mr. Matthieu would be the speaker. And it was my intention for him to be the speaker at every group that first came up there. Simply because the first time these visitors would come into a prison, they were able to listen to a gentleman who showed compassion, had a heart, and also some concern about other fellow inmates, because he went into kind of detail of what he actually did as a hospice volunteer. And when you start talking to a group of church people about having to sit with people who are dying, having to hold their hands, having to pray with them, having to change their dirty linens, help them in the shower, and feed them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that struck a chord more so than any other speaker the rest of the day. Because all of a sudden, on that very first visit in that chapel, these guests got to see the inmate in another vein other than what they perceived the inmate to be. They saw someone who had compassion and a heart. And it really set the tone for the rest of the day. Every one of these retreats we had, very, very successful. The tour, then the other testimony was very successful. But Matthieu set the tone for all of these by him being the first speaker and really going into details of what a hospice worker does. And I think from church group's perspective, that set the tone for what we have. So I was always very sure that he was going to be there and he would be our first speaker, because for me as a guy for the whole day, it really set the tone. And I will say this in retrospect, his talk at the beginning of that retreat is one of the ones that people remember the most. I've talked to people who've gone up to Angola on a retreat 2 or 3, 4 years ago. And they still talk about that first visit with that hospice worker. So the impact he had on the groups that we brought into the church and his service to the church, as well as to the Angola community, I think was unparalleled. And I'm kind of honored to be able to be up here and speaking for him, because I guess he spoke for me in a lot of different times when groups came up there. So again, I just wanted to come up here and let you all know he was a very genuine, came from the heart, came from the soul, for him to explain what he did, and had a tremendous impact on the tone of the day and what these people took from their visit to Angola, because they didn't leave there thinking that everyone in Angola was violent. They saw a heart. And that's what he displayed on the talk to our group. So I just wanted to come up here and let you all know what a wonderful job he did. And not only that, because I was also involved in the development of some of the Catholic pyramids. And although I wasn't there when that 3-year program got started that he completed, I know it was a lot of detail, a lot of hard work. I know a bunch of the guys who have completed it. So it took a determination, a commitment, and some work. And I'm proud of all those guys that completed that program. So anyway, I just wanted to come up here and let you all know that from my point of view, he was a tremendous asset to our program. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Be careful.
Elizabeth Steverson? Is she on Zoom?
She should be on Zoom. She's in Georgia.
Ms. Steverson, are you on with us?
That's not me. Ask her to unmute.
Ms. Steverson, would you please unmute the microphone?
Yes, yes.
We can hear you now. Yes, please. If you'll just introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to know about your cousin.
Okay, my name is Elizabeth Steverson, and I live in Tucker, Georgia, and Randy is my first cousin, and he is more like a brother to me. And we were raised together very young. And I moved away from Georgia when I moved to Georgia when I was in my 20s. And I have stayed in contact with Randy for all of these years. While he was at Angola, I would visit with him periodically. And I guess the most important thing that I want to share with all of you is that I am just so amazed and so proud of the person that he is. When I think of Randy, the words that I think of are kindness, caring, and compassion. And he is so right in the fact that had he not been incarcerated, I believe that he would have had a very, very early death. And I believe that his incarceration has helped numerous people. He has been a mentor. He has done education, so many programs and so much outreach that so many people that are even on the outside have not achieved a lot of the things that he has done. And another thing is that he has maintained a positive attitude. Every time I speak to him, anytime I have visited with him in person, whether it's the rodeo or a visit, he always has a kind word and is always there to help other people. And I am just so excited about the opportunity for him to come and live with me and be a part of our family here in Georgia. I just feel like that all of the years that he has spent, and I know a part of it is, I do know that he has so much regret with what happened to him early on. And I feel like that his life is a testament to the life that was lost. And I just am so appreciative, and thank you so much for your consideration for granting him this amazing gift, for him to live a quiet, peaceful, joyful life for the rest of his years. And I feel like that one of the things that I can so see him continuing to do when he gets out is to be involved. There are some hospice centers near where I live. There is a wonderful Catholic church, and I just, feel in my heart that once he is out, that part of him is not going to stop. I think he is going to continue wanting to reach out and serve people. It's who he is. It's at the heart at who he is. So thank you so very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak up on his behalf.
Thank you, Ms. Steverson. We appreciate your comments. Mr. Matthieu, is there anything you'd like to say to the board before the board ultimately votes?
I'd just like to say that I'm really sorry for the evil things that I've done so many 40 years ago. And that if I could change what I did 40 years ago, I would. And I pray every day for the victim's family and the soul of my victim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthieu. We appreciate your comments. I'm going to ask that the board go into executive session.
I make the motion.
And I'll second.
Any objection? No objection. The board is going to be in executive session for a few minutes. We will return. We will be in executive session to discuss confidential matters. We'll be back with the decision momentarily. Pardon board is back in session. I think the panel is ready to vote. Ms. Jackson?
All right. Mr. Matthieu, I will tell you that I came in kind of on the fence, wasn't sure which way I was going to go, but after having talked to you and taken into consideration just your excellent disciplinary record, your work for not only hospice, but also Lookout Project, the positive remarks from your supervisors, the fact that you have not had a write-up in over 30 years. My vote today would be to grant a commutation, a recommendation for a commutation to 70 years.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Mr. Roche?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Matthews, you have an excellent disciplinary record. That I think it's been 33 years since your last write-up. You have 16 years of work with hospice. Chaplain Jackson, excellent comments. Captain Washington, excellent comments. So my vote is the same. To commute to 70 years. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Mr. Freeman?
I concur with my colleagues, and I vote to commute to 70.
Mr. Matthieu, you have 3 votes to commute to 70 years. I concur with my colleagues. You've been an inmate counselor. Your hospice work is certainly well respected. For 16 years you've done that. You've got a low tiger. Good luck, sir. You have, we will be recommending to the governor that he commute your sentence to 70 years. Good luck to you.
Thank the board at this time for their recommendation.